Of course, it's wonderful to talk with you again. You were on with your memoir. I think that's the last time we actually talked um, about books. And now Mecca. And I want you to tell me, although I think I know where the book came from, but as if I don't know, tell me where it came from. How did this idea come about?
We had a great time talking about In the Country of Women. That was so fun. That was in person, and it's funny because that was in Newport Beach. And I remember I drove down. It was Lido Books, and I parked at the Newport Beach Elks Lodge. Remember? Because I'm a Riverside Elks Lodge member,
That's
and so
right.
they took me into the lodge, and they're asking me about Riverside, and of course I saw somebody I knew. And I'm telling you that because everyone thinks of Southern California as this giant place where no one ever knows each other. And you know that's not true. And that's part of what Mecca is about. It's about all these disparate seeming communities in Southern California, but you have all these people who are indigenous to Southern California who have such deep roots that, of course, they know everyone. And there's so many family secrets. So this book actually became, to me, like this testament to family in Southern California. And I will tell you that Johnny Frias is a seventh generation Californian, and he's born in Santa Ana, lives in the Chino Hills on a rancho. That's the last name of the owner is Anza. So I was writing about people who have been here forever, like the people who came with the Anza party in 1774. And Johnny Frias is a descendant of his mom, who crossed the border from Mexico with the Anza Party, and his dad, who came from Jalisco in the 1900s. So Johnny Frias is a California Highway Patrol officer. He's a motorcycle officer.
Mhm.
And his story came to me from my friend Louis Lozano, who's from Corona,
Hmm.
who Barbara used to sit on my porch, has sat on my porch for the last 23 years telling me stories. And he wanted to be a CHP officer.
Hmm.
And he was told, oh, like you're a Mexican guy, you can't do that. And just so many of the different stories. Like there's a time when Johnny is in a fight for his life and he knows how to kill someone with three particularly placed punches. And Louis Lozano told me that story too. Um, so there's that thread. And then the other thread is Jimena, who is a young woman from Oaxaca who's only 19 and crosses the border and is working in the Coachella Valley. And I've been writing about her for 12 years. I've been writing stories about this young woman. I really loved her. Um, yeah, there are a lot of different characters in the book, but they all have these interconnections because that's how Southern California really is.
Mhm. And some of the pieces were published prior. Yes.
That I loved this notion. In fact, I wrote this essay about Louise Erdrich and the polyphonic novel for Lit Hub because this past 2 years working on this book, I realized that I love that form, the novel with multiple narrators,
Mhm.
because Louise Erdrich's short story Scales was one of the first things I ever read when I was a junior in college at USC.
Hmm.
And some of the other polyphonic novels that I have loved over the years are by so many different writers, James Welch, Elena Maria Viramontes. Um, so what I did was I'd been thinking about Johnny Frias since 2009. And I think which is really funny, that was in Orange County Noir. I
Mhm.
wrote about Johnny Frias killing a man in this canyon, this secret canyon, because he was trying to protect a stranger from what he thought was going to be death. And so this is the secret that he harbors. And I wrote that for Orange County Noir in 2008, 2009. So
Mhm.
that story stayed in my mind, but I wasn't quite sure about Johnny's trajectory. So I wrote another story about Jimena, and then I wrote a story about a character named Matalas, who is the most like me and my friends. She's a single mom. She's from, a place like Riverside, and she's got these two boys, and she works as a florist. And so, yes, I published some of those as stories. And then I realized that some of the characters were mentioned
Mhm.
in the other stories. And I thought, oh, these people all know each other. So I love teaching my students and also talking to writers about novels that are like a chorus of voices, and that's definitely what this came out to be.
Hmm. Yeah, I love that structure too. Um, Johnny Frias is interesting. I love his thing with words and idioms. You know, like, why is it holy smoke and not holy salmon? Why is it this? Why is it that? Is that something your friend did too?
No, Louis from Corona, and like if Louis and I are talking, it'll be like they're Spanish. Like Louis and I are the same exact age, so if it's somebody I grew up with, we'll be like, well, that was some pendejada, or like, oh, look, he won't even pass the pelota. How are they going to score? That part is easy, but the actual part where Johnny Frias is obsessed with speaking American completely comes from me being like the child of someone who was an immigrant.
Mm,
My mom is from Switzerland, my stepdad's from Canada, and I was fascinated with my mom wanted to speak perfect English. And so she learned English from Vin Scully. So doing Dodger broadcasts. So just imagine like some of the idioms that she was okay with from being a lifelong baseball fan from the time she got here at 19. So there were other things that my mother would never understand or never say. Things like holy cow or holy smoke. She would never say that.
mhm.
But my real dad he had a terrible life in Colorado. Grew up on a ranch in the coldest town, Fraser, coldest town in America. Never got to sleep inside. His dad made him sleep out in the barn. He almost froze to death many times. But that's that old, like, Gunsmoke kind of,
Mhm.
where Festus on Gunsmoke is like, you can bet your Sunday socks that he's going to get pie-eyed down at the watering hole. That's literally like how my dad would talk, my real dad. So, as you also know, I met my future husband in the 8th grade, and his dad was from Oklahoma, and his mom was from Mississippi. So there was a whole nother layer of American language. I was always obsessed with that. And Johnny, it's like many of my friends where we were navigating between so many different languages, but it was really the ability to speak American. And
Mhm.
American is such a crazy, holy mackerel, holy smokes, holy cow. That's it. There's never, there's never like you said,
Right.
it's not holy salmon. So where did holy mackerel come from? And it's not like holy lion, it's holy cow. I had fun writing about that, and my friends and I always have fun making up like things that people say.
Hmm. I was thinking as you were just talking, I don't think I ever asked you how you came to writing.
Oh, really? As many times as we've talked, girl, that's pretty funny. Um, I I wrote an essay for the LA Times maybe 3 or 4 years ago, maybe 4 years ago, and it's one of the most popular things I ever wrote, and it was that my stepdad, who's from Canada, caught me with a can of beer. One can of beer changed my life and made me into a writer. And the funny thing was, my mother ran me over accidentally when I was in the 8th grade, and I wanted to be a cheerleader. She thought cheerleading was stupid, so I mean, she ran me over accidentally, but I clearly was not going to be a cheerleader. I was in traction for 2 months, then I don't want to walk again. During that time, I read in the hospital. I'd always read, but I had this really kind the teacher who comes to you when you're in the hospital for 2 months and you can't get out of bed.
Mhm.
Um, she brought me books, and then freshman year, just a year later, my best friend and I were going to try to sneak beer down to these 18-year-olds that thought it'd be fun to have 14-year-old girlfriends. And she never got caught, but I always got caught because I had immigrant parents and they have very, very good eyes. So I got caught with this can of beer. And then my friends ended up, when I was 15, they ended up selling a lot of drugs. These 3 girlfriends of mine, and I wasn't allowed to be with them. And my mom never got to graduate from high school. She went to Riverside City College
Hmm.
to get an AA, and she was in an English class and a history class, and she made me go to summer school. She said, you have to sign up for summer school because your friends are selling drugs. Can you imagine? I'm 15 and I'm a girl. So I take a creative writing class and a health sciences class. And the creative writing class, I'm 15. Girl, everybody else in there is like, at least 18 or 20. And there were people in there that were in their 30s and even a couple men in their 40s. I wrote a couple of short stories, and the professor who was born in Long Beach. His name was Bill Bowers. He was a desert rat
Hmm.
who loved Joshua Tree back then. He called me into his office and said, "You're the real thing, like you're a writer." And I'd written these 3 short stories, and they were maybe 4 pages each. And he read one of them out loud in class because I was too afraid to. And that was that feeling, that I could do something well. And
Hmm.
also the ability to, I really loved using language. Like I was describing the mountains of Idlewild, and actually I was describing like finding scorpions in our sleeping bags when we used to sleep on the ground at Anza Borrego. I was already writing about California, right? It takes the kindness of someone like a professor like Bill Bowers sometimes to change your life. When I was only 15, so I wrote my first real short stories then, and then I became a sports writer when I went to USC. But I always wanted to take fiction, and I had a couple great professors at USC. TC Boyle, Tom Boyle, was really encouraging to me, and then James Baldwin was my teacher for graduate school when I was getting my MFA. I was already married. I was only 22, and I had James Baldwin for a teacher. So I
Hmm.
got really lucky. Um, but yeah, thanks for asking, because my path is quite different from, I'd say, most people's path, in that I got caught with a can of Olympia in my jeans jacket because it was June, and my mom's like, "Why are you wearing a jacket? It's June."
You're like, oh, just a little chilly, little
A little
chilly.
chilly, and she said, "Why is it heavier on one side?" And I was like, "Here you
Huh. Yeah, I think in your memoir you wrote about James Baldwin,
go." I
about
did,
yeah.
yeah. That was a big deal for me, and my mom was a big deal. She was really mean to me because she thought being a writer was a dumb idea, but she thought I'd make a very good secretary. So, I typed very fast. And then she wanted me to be a sports writer so she could meet Vin Scully, even though she was married, and so was Vin Scully. It was the dream of her life to meet Vin Scully and shake his hand, if you can imagine that. So I was a sports writer, but Barbara, writing about sports was perfect because I grew up in a neighborhood that was pretty poor, and either you were selling drugs or you got good at sports. But to be an intellectual, like I can say now that I was this really smart little kid who didn't have much money, navigating both of those worlds. It's pretty funny because here I am writing about Johnny Frias, and he and his dad are lifelong Dodger fans, and my mom is 88, and I'm going to see her after we talk today. I'll go pick her up, and we will play Rummy Cube, and then we'll watch the Dodgers. And she has dementia. She has a 30-second memory, pretty much. She
Mhm.
doesn't know who's on the Dodgers, but she knows they better beat the Giants. That's her favorite thing to say. And I think I always wanted to write about our homeland. To write about our SoCal is to write about the Dodgers and the Angels. And you're gonna laugh, but I'm working on my new book now. And as you know, I just had COVID, and my new book is a sequel to Mecca. And Johnny Frias and his dad live on this rancho. They raise cattle in the Chino Hills, with two guides, the Vargas brothers, who are in their 80s. And people don't realize, like, I have a lot of friends who raise longhorn cattle, like out in a canyon. And my ex-husband Dwayne, who will also come over after I take my mom home, he has this friend that raises bison still in Fontana. So I wanted to write about that kind of secret life where people are raising longhorn cattle and then listening to the Dodgers on their little radio in their pocket, and picking oranges. So what I was working on this morning is a guy who gets in a fight because an Angels fan punches a Dodgers fan, and I thought, well, this is very dark, and it's in Santa Ana, and yeah, I wanted to write about our SoCal.
Speaking of dark, I was thinking about this and your work because you kind of mash up genres. You write literary fiction, you write crime fiction. You've won awards for different genres that you do. And are you thinking about that when you're writing? Are you thinking about categories, or where your book's going to go on the shelf, or how it's going to be categorized? Or are you just going with the story, and however it turns out, it turns out?
I think no one's ever asked me that question before. And it's not something that I think about while I'm writing, but sometimes it's what I think about after one of my books come out. Like Mecca has gotten such great reviews. I've been so fortunate. but it's been reviewed as everything, like you said, from literary fiction to, California fiction to fiction with a very dark sort of plot. And I see, behind you, you have the noir series too. And I've really enjoyed the Akashic Noir series. And that's what I won the Edgar for, was
Mhm.
a story that became a chapter in my 2012 book, Between Heaven
Yes.
and Here. And that book was about a young woman who's found murdered and her body is in a shopping cart. And my brother-in-law found her.
Hmm.
Like 10 years before I wrote that book, my brother-in-law was walking down the street at dawn. He was headed to the park, for whatever nefarious reasons, because he had like 12 girlfriends at the time. He's a very good looking man, my brother-in-law general. And he passed the shopping cart and he said to me, "Sis, I thought it was closed in there." And
Hmm.
I looked and he said it wasn't closed. And so no one cared about this young woman. She was only 17 and she was pregnant. And that just stayed on my mind. And that became Between Heaven and Here, which you're right, it is a noir story, but it was in 2012 and it was kind of people looked at noir in a different way then. You know
Mhm.
what I mean? That was 10 years ago.
Mhm.
So that won the Edgar Award, but it came from me actually hearing that young woman's mom say, this is a young Black girl who's been found murdered. No one's ever going to care about who did it.
Hmm.
And that just broke my heart. So I wrote about the death of this beautiful woman. Then this new book, Mecca Modelas, the character Modelas, she's cousins with that young woman who was killed. And she knows a lot of the main characters from that book too. That's, I think, because my family is so big. I have like 400 or 500 people on my married side of my family.
Hmm.
And then, there's another 100 people on like my side of my family. And then when you live in a neighborhood for 30, I've lived on my block for, we moved in here in 88. So I've lived on my block for 34 years. So there's people on my block that, call me auntie or la vieja or like whatever. I think what noir means is family secrets, usually, if you go back to some
Mhm.
of our favorites like Ross McDonald, but even Janet Fitch, and two of my favorite writers, Michael Connelly and Walter Mosley. Look at all those noir things that happen, whether it's murders or the concealment of evidence. It almost always comes down to some kind of family secret or something that someone doesn't want revealed. I
Mhm.
just finished reading Michael Connelly's The Black Echo. It
Mhm.
came out 30 years ago, and we had this great event. He's so nice, and I had him sign a copy of Black Echo for Dwayne, for my ex-husband, because that was one of his favorite books. So I reread The Black Echo, and Michael Connelly's deal with Harry Bosch is everybody counts or nobody counts. Like he has
Mhm.
T-shirts that say that. That's exactly the way I think of with Johnny Frias, is that everyone in his life, whether it's his friend Manny Delgado or his friend Grief Embers, they are all in it for life. These four guys,
Mhm.
and that's like familia. Like that's the way old school people work. Even if you were just friends and you're friends for 50 years, then you're family, right?
Mhm. Speaking of Michael Connolly, he called Mecca a masterpiece.
It was very nice.
Just very nice. Nicer than nice, right?
Michael Connolly and I go way back. This is a funny one too. So I had my three little kids, my three daughters, as you know. I was a single mom, and Michael Connolly, he had written Black Ice. So Black Echo came out 30 years ago. So Black Ice came out after that. So I'd say my kids were really little. Rosette was a baby. She must have been maybe a year or two old. And I packed him up and drove all the way to Mysterious, what was it? Mysterious
Mysterious
Galaxy?
Galaxy.
Maybe there was Mysterious Books. So there was a bookstore in Orange. And I
Mm.
drove all the way down there to get Michael Connolly to sign my book.
Book
So
Carnival.
yes, Book Carnival. That's what it was. Thank you so much, because I keep trying to remember. So Michael Connolly looks up and he sees me there and he's like, "What do you wait? Aren't you Susan Straight?" Because I waited till the end because I had all my kids, right? And they were looking at the children's books. So they were lying on the ground looking at the children's books, and I'm listening to Michael Connolly talk about Black Ice, right?
Mhm.
And he just said, "What do you?" And I'm like, I love your books. Like, I'm a big fan, and we've been like we only would see each other once or twice a year at something like LA Times Book Festival. So Michael Connolly's mom and my mom were both bank tellers.
Hmm.
We both have this way of looking at the world where we hear these super dark stories, but we kind of just want to take them apart like a puzzle and
Mhm.
figure out what they are. And he has just been so fun to talk to over the years. I love all the little details in the Bosch novels, in Walter Mosley's novels.
Mhm.
I like Ivy Pakota's work. I really love Steph Chaw's novel, Your House Will Pay, but I liked her early stuff too.
Mhm.
Again, going back to Janet Fitch, Wanda Coleman wrote some very dark and beautiful stories. And you know who else? So did Kate Braverman and Carolyn C.
Mhm.
Um, I'd say Helena Maria Viramontes is again one of my OG, like that's one of my favorite people and writers in the world. And she and I, when we get together, we have only seen each other every maybe couple years, and we'll just have these intense conversations about the darknesses
Mhm.
that we have experienced in our lives because of where we live. The people that we've lost because we've grown up around people that lived real hard. And it's funny, I have this little piece of paper right here that I just was thinking about. I have these two things, especially for people who are listening that might be writers. This is my Helena Maria Viramontes post-it, and this is my Loretta Lynn post-it. So you'll like this. Elena Maria Viramontes says, "Writing is how I pray. It connects me to the voices above." And this one, I wrote these in 2017. And I've had them on my computer all this time because they were helpful for both the memoir and really helpful for Mecca.
Mhm.
This is Loretta Lynn, 2017. "If you write about what's happening, it don't hurt as bad. It don't bother you as much. That's how it does me. I don't know how anybody else does it, but that's the way I do it. I need to write." And this is because Loretta Lynn had written a memoir, her first book,
Mhm.
and she was being interviewed. And I wrote that down while she was talking. And I just thought, yeah. So I think Michael Connolly and a lot of us who are writing noir, but also writing character, really, we're always writing about the characters. Don't you think so?
I think so. I mean, isn't that where it begins, really?
Where it all begins. I mean, for you, when you and I talk, when we see each other at a festival or wherever, the books that we love the best begin with character and landscape, don't you think?
Hmm. I do.
Yeah. Palm Springs Noir was great, by the way. I really enjoyed Alex Espinosa's story. I know he's my former student, but Alex Espinosa and Todd Goldberg, man, those guys are writing at the height of their powers too. They're both so good. And it's interesting because when I was writing Mecca, I mean, the title Mecca comes from the city in the Coachella Valley, Mecca.
Yes. Yes.
And I've been going to Coachella since I was 5. My mom was obsessed with the desert because she was from a cold place, Switzerland. And she and my dad, my stepdad, who's from Canada, also a cold place, they loved going to the desert in the summer. And there were 5 of us kids, and we'd be like, "What are we doing here? Why are we out in Indio in August buying fresh dates?" And my mom would be like, "Because they taste very good when they're fresh." And we're like, "Okay, it's 125. We're gonna die."
So how did they end up in Riverside?
Well, my mom's stepmom, my mom's mom died when she was only 9, and she had a terrible, mean stepmother that scared everyone. But my stepmother was head nurse at Kaiser Steel in Fontana,
Hmm.
the original Kaiser Permanente building. Barbara was tiny, so they lived in Fontana, and my mom ended up they lived in a trailer, and my mom was like, "I'm not living in a trailer." So she left, she ran away, and she moved into a boarding house, a rooming house, in Riverside. My real dad came to get a $50 loan from her at the savings and loan bank she worked at, household finance. And then he asked her out, and he was already married and had 2 kids, so this seems like an incredibly bad idea. And he was sleeping in his car because he was on strike from Boeing. And yet she married him, and she had me, and then she was pregnant with my brother. And then he left. And then my mom had met this very nice Canadian man at her job. He also worked at household finance. And they became citizens together. Like, they ran into each other again during the citizenship ceremony and classes at the Riverside Courthouse. It's pretty funny. Anyway, That's how they got here. And I was literally born, 3 blocks from where I'm sitting now. Which is funny because when you and I are talking about character and landscape, I often think of some of our favorite writers like Eddie Smith, Remember a Tree Grows in Brooklyn.
Mhm.
And I loved Sounder by William Armstrong. I really loved Autobiography of Miss Jane Pittman by Ernest J. Gaines. But those were the books I read growing up, at the Riverside Public Library. And I always, always, always wanted to escape into a novel. Um, and so I feel really lucky that like people write to me all the time now and say, I know Southern California so vividly and so intimately because of, your 9 books. And that makes me really happy.
So you left for a brief time for graduate school, and then you came back.
Yes.
Why did you
We
come
came
back?
because we were poor. And I was already married. I was 22 when I got married. And then that year we studied. I studied with James Baldwin. Dwayne worked at a juvenile institution. He always was a correctional officer.
Mhm.
And he wrecked the car. We didn't even have a car. It was cold and we didn't know anybody. And Boston and Amherst were very, very racist. We had a lot of trouble. So,
Mhm.
I didn't even stay for graduation. We had bought a car for $500 from an Algerian dude. We got in the car and it took us a week to get home because the car broke down every day. It broke down for the last time in front of my dad's house. And that was it. And we always said we were going to go do this, that, and the other, but we didn't have any money. And so I started teaching at Inland Empire Job Corps and
Mhm.
trying to write my first book. And he got a job. He got several jobs. In fact, one of his first jobs was at a correctional institution in the desert,
Mhm.
um, right where Whitewater is. And that was the beginning of me writing about the desert because I used to have to go pick him up and drop him off. And he just told me such stories about the desert. So that's where a lot of the stories from Aqua Boogie came from. And that was published when I was 29, and I just had my first baby when I was 28, and I was pregnant with my second baby when Aqua Boogie came out.
Mhm.
So, after that, just never left. And I always feel as if there are endless amounts of amazing stories to write about here. So I've never been tempted to go anywhere. And plus, our family's here, and when when you're that deeply enmeshed in everything, how can you leave?
How can you leave? I'd love to hear you read from Mecca.
Oh, that'd be fun.
Let's hear it.
Uh, actually, what's I wrote this is the very beginning, Fuego Canyon. It's about the Santa Ana winds. And the other day I was working on the sequel to Mecca, and of course the wind came up and it was like 103 or 104 that day, and here came the smoke. My whole house was filled with smoke
Mm.
because I live just a block and a half from the Santa Ana river bottom,
Mhm.
and it's always starting on fire. So I was thinking about this part the other day, and it'd be really nice to read this. This is from the very beginning of Mecca. This is called Fuego Canyon,
Okay.
and Johnny Frias is on his motorcycle. He's working, and it takes place in the Santa Ana River Canyon between Yorba Linda and Corona. The wind started up at 3 a.m. the same way it had for hundreds of years. The same way I used to hear the blowing so hard around our little house in the canyon that the loose windowsills sounded like harmonicas. The old metal weather stripping played like the gods pressed their mouths around the screens in the living room where I slept when I was growing up. After I got off work this morning, the wind took a break, and I was knocked out for a few hours, waking up to hear Rose Sotelo's radio next door playing ranchera music, tubas and trumpets thumping against the stucco, her canaries worried in their little songs. But now that I was back on shift, the Harley was pushing hard against the biggest gusts, the Santa Anas blowing crazier than ever, the way they did in the afternoons, feared from the nap. Brazilian pepper trees, the ones that grew in every vacant lot or frontage road area along the 91 and 55 freeways, had those long branches like ferns or seaweed. And when the wind blew them sideways like skirts, I could see homeless encampments under a lot of the trees. It was a Thursday in October. Santa Ana winds, 94 degrees, fire weather. People were 3 layers of pissed off. Everyone hated Thursday. Wednesday was hump day, But Thursday was when people drove like they wanted to kill each other. Today, everyone was thinking of Halloween, the women wondering what sexy costume to wear for parties now that grown-ups had taken over the holiday, the men pissed that the Dodgers had lost, even though they were supposed to be the boys of October, and now the 2019 baseball season was over. The wind. Every few minutes, dust and trash flew across the lanes. But fall winds always made me think of my mother, holding me tight in the old redwood chair my father had tied to the porch railing, up in Fuego Canyon, near the Chino Hills, where the Santa Anas blew in the black night when they always started. And my first memory, her talking to me before dawn, the gusts so strong it felt like our little house would go rolling down the canyon like a tumbleweed, the horses snorting in the barn, and my father down in the orange groves, making sure the trees didn't dry out. Nothing else is for sure but the wind, my mom would say, while the eucalyptus leaves and bark flew past us. We might not get rain, mijo, for a whole year, but we always get the Santa Ana.
Lovely. I love that. What a great beginning. And I wanted to ask you about your first sentence too, and how, well, what exactly is my question? It's like when you're working on the beginning, do you keep going back to that first page and that first sentence and getting it just right? Or does it come out the right way the first time and you just keep going? Because that, what you do with sound in that first sentence is wonderful, the loose winded hills.
It's a good craft question, Barbara. Like it really is, because it's like, I mean, that's literally what I was doing yesterday when I finally got my brain a little bit back from COVID. It's, I think for me, this house, this old house, which used to be an orange grove, like there's still a ditch on the side. Like I still have rights to run my pigs down to the Santa Ana River if I want to. So I choose not to because that's where we park our car. But when the wind used to blow when my kids were little, the wind would blow so hard that it sounded like a harmonica in their bedroom. And it was like this giant angry God was blowing on their window screens because the windows were so old and so loose. So like that's just always been on my mind. But the wind, the way we know it, like it's so strange. If it says the Santa Ana winds will start tonight, they start up at like 2 or 3 a.m. And it's always this absolute shock and it wakes you up, right? And you start hearing branches hit the house or gates. And then it takes a break. And I remember when I was walking home from school, right at 3 o'clock, and we'd be walking home, and I walked home through the orange groves and over a canal bridge, like that's where I lived. Oh my gosh, the wind would be so strong. My friends would always grab me and say, if anybody blows away, it's going to be her. Look at her. She's so little. They would hold on to me. They were sure I was going to blow away. And so I think once you get into that imaginative idea and you can see it, for me, the sentences come out pretty much the right way. Like that first paragraph was just a joy to write. The much harder part for me is plot. I knew this plot would be about Johnny's secret, that he had killed that man in the canyon, and that he's a cop, and that he has never been able to tell anybody. And like to carry that kind of secret, so many of us as humans, we have one or two things that you've never told anybody. And for whatever reason, people tell me these secrets. And so I know about something like this, and I know about other things. And so I just often think the hardest part for me is to try to figure out the plot, not the actual like sentence level, but the plot. And today, I'm working on on Johnny Frias again. And it's really funny. There are so many different things that happen to my friends who are, dispatchers, or I have a lot of friends who are nurses. And so right now I'm writing about COVID. And it's weird because I wrote about COVID for Mecca, and I'd had COVID in April 2020. But this time I had it worse in a different way. I've had it, and I feel differently. But writing about COVID last time, it's because all my nurse friends, they would be walking to the hospital because they didn't want to get the germs in their car. They only had one car, and they didn't want their husband or their kids getting in that car. And they would walk to the hospital, which is right down the street, and they would linger at the fence, we'd be 6 feet apart, and they would just tell me about the things they saw. And so hearing the way they saw things, it was easy for me to write those things down.
Mhm.
And so I'll never forget, like, my friend who still walks by every night, my friend Marcia. Now we've got this new surge, and so we're talking about it. But when COVID was at its height, it was December 2020,
Hmm.
and it was the worst. Remember, that's when you saw people being triaged out in parking
Right.
lots. And she would tell me, I'm walking through these tents, and I'm walking through a gift shop, and there's people in there. And I walk to the ICU, and there's these men, and they're all lying on their stomachs. And men don't like to sleep on their stomachs,
Mhm.
and big men especially. And that just broke my heart. And then Dwayne, my ex-husband, he got COVID November of this past year, and he had to sleep on his stomach. And I'd written about it, and it was just the strangest
Hmm.
feeling because I called the ambulance for him and I took care of him. And just to think about that, the layers. And it is true, like, some people write poetry and some people write fantasy and some people write romance. And for me, I'm always trying to process how scary everything is, to try to do that with the beauty of language. So
Hmm.
that's a good question. It's really good.
Do you keep notebooks and write down similes and metaphors and
No, I don't, but I just write down, like, I have stacks and stacks of legal pads. Like, this is how I write my books. I
Mhm.
don't write on the computer first. Like, I have stacks and stacks of legal pads, and then I have little post-its everywhere. The one thing I do write down is, like I was telling you, he's busy getting pie-eyed every night at the watering hole. I saved that one because you're just a shadow of your former self. And then, like, I was fit to be tied. You know what I mean? Like, I'll write these little things down, but I write still by hand a lot of the time, but I don't write down, like, the similes or whatever. That comes out fairly naturally. But yeah, like, the again, the interesting thing is I have to write down, like, a map. I always have to make a map, and I did the same thing for Mecca as well.
do you do that
Um,
at first before you even begin?
I know, like, I start out with these characters, and then, yeah, I start getting into it, and I'm like, okay, now where is this in the Chino Hills? Like, what are the
Mhm.
canyons? So if you were to drive down the 91 from Riverside to
Mhm.
you're passing, like, Green River Canyon, where there's a
Right.
golf course. And I mean, I've known all these since I was a little kid, right? And we used to, like, ride our bikes down there. But there's Green River Canyon, then there's Coal Canyon Road, and there's Coal Canyon, right? And then there's Gypsum Canyon,
Mhm.
Brush Canyon, Box Canyon, and you end up at Carbon Canyon Road, and
Mhm.
that goes up from, like, Yorba Linda, and it goes over the Chino Hills, and it goes into Chino. And that's, just think about that. That's an old Serrano walking trail that
Mhm.
is now like a 2-lane road that's a commuter shortcut. So
Mhm.
I tend to, like, I really love making a little map, yeah, to see. I've done that for each book. I especially had to do that for High Wire Moon.
Mhm.
Some of the characters from High Wire Moon show up here,
Mhm.
in which is funny. I had to do that for High Wire Moon, and I had to do that for A Million Nightingales, which was set in Louisiana. And
Mhm.
then, yeah,
So writing longhand, why do you start that way?
I just think that's how I was trained. My mom gave me my little typewriter that I still have in my bedroom, Little Smith Corona. She gave me that for when I graduated from high school. I was 17 when I graduated. So, I mean, I loved typing, but typing was always work. Like, I was a secretary, and then I was a clerk, and then I was a sports writer, and then computers showed up when I was, at USC, right? When I was typing. But I
Mhm.
always thought of typing on the computer or typing as work. And I always thought of my fiction writing as, like, something I just did for myself.
Mhm.
So I'm not saying I never type on the computer, but
Right.
I almost always begin with, something that I write down that comes to me at whatever time. And I mean, it might come to me, like, in the middle of the night, but okay, you want to know this one? This is really funny. I wouldn't show this to anybody else, girl. So my neighbor came over, it was about a month and a half ago, Sergio Delgado, and his wife is Priscilla. And Priscilla and I went to high school together, and Sergio was a little older than us, and Priscilla was a little older than me. And they've lived on the next corner
Hmm.
30. We've lived by each other for 34 years, but like literally we went to school together. So Sergio came over and he was trying to catch a gopher for me. And then it was really funny because he's like, well, I mean, I already took care of mine. And I knew what he was saying. And then he just went like this, right? So he shoots his gophers, but like he can't be shooting my gophers. And I don't want him to shoot my gophers. But the gopher was unfortunately had fleas, and I was afraid it's going to get on my dog. So Sergio's sitting there trying to dig. He's digging and he's putting in a gopher trap. And he starts talking to me about the nuns. Literally, Dwayne comes over and they both went to the same Catholic school, Our Lady of Guadalupe Shrine. And they were like, remember the nuns? Dwayne was like, the nuns used to beat me. And Sergio said, well, I like to chew gum. And he's like, he said, I couldn't stop chewing gum, Dwayne. And so they would make you take the gum out and they would put your nose against the wall for 2 hours. You couldn't, if they could put the ruler between your nose and the wall during that 2 hours, you got another hour. And I was just like, I'm sorry, what's happening? And he and Dwayne are like, yeah. And Sergio was like, your back, your neck, your shoulders, everything. He'd say your eyes were just focused on this crack because you had to keep your nose against the wall because you had chewed gum. And I had to write it down because I was just like, that's like this vivid memory. And Sergio said, so I chew gum every day. I still chew. He's 65, Barbara, and he's like, I chew gum every day. You know what? Because nobody can stop me now. How could I not write that down? That night I was just sitting there and I was like who of our children would ever even know about that if I didn't write it down?
Mhm.
That you got caught chewing one piece of double bubble because that's what he wanted to chew, remember? Like in a way, that's such an artifact of our times, isn't it? That you were chewing double bubble, which is a terrible thing, and you couldn't hide it, and that you had to put your nose against the wall
Yeah.
and touch the wall.
Hmm.
He said it happened to him so many times.
Well, that reminds me of something that was said in I think this was the New York Times review of Mecca. And I love this line, at the heart of most of her work, your work, is the idea that one's relationship to a place plays perhaps the most vital role in shaping how we understand the world. I love that.
Yeah, I think that was really nice. Caribbean Fragosa lives
Mhm.
in Almonte, and it was a lovely review. I had never met her until a few months after the book review came out. But she really did. She really got me in the heart when she said that, because I believe that's true too. And like I said, if I were to talk to Sergio,
Mhm.
we would know each other in a way. Wayne and Sergio and Priscilla and me standing, the four of us, having gone to the same high school, having lived here our whole lives, we would have a whole code of language that even our own children can't understand. Sergio and Priscilla's oldest son died suddenly of a brain aneurysm
Mm.
at 30, and their younger son, who went to school with my middle daughter, he's been in the Marines since he joined when he was 18. But the way we look at the world is a way that looks, it comes from this place, right? Like Priscilla's mom worked in the chicken packing house,
Mhm.
and my mom used to have to pick crops in Canada when she was 15. That's why she didn't get to go to high school. So I love that you read that. I was thinking the other day, one of my characters in the book is Ali Sadat. He's from Afghanistan, and he's forever shaped by leaving Afghanistan,
Mm.
when he was so young and coming to Southern California. And he's one of my favorite characters
Mhm.
read about, is
Mm.
because he's forever shaped by being the only male in his family and having three younger sisters that have to find husbands. And just the notion, he works at a 7-Eleven,
Mm.
and like how many guys do we know that are brilliant men who work at a 7-Eleven or who work at a laundromat or work at a liquor store
Mm.
in Southern California because
Yeah.
they came from somewhere else.
Somewhere
And
else.
that's definitely because my parents came from somewhere else and were so poor and had to start out in the same difficult way.
Mhm.
That you kind of look at, like when I go to the liquor store, I talk to the person working at the liquor store and always get to hear about that journey. So
Hmm.
that's a very specific American thing, I think, don't you?
I do. I was thinking also about your stuff, your work, and what you were saying earlier about you had, there's so many stories. There's so many stories where you live and no end to them. And it reminded me of a Flannery O'Connor quote where she said, if you make it through your childhood, you have enough material to last a lifetime, right? I mean, like, you don't have to go looking for stories. You don't have to, people go, oh, I haven't been anywhere. What do I have to write about? Well,
Yeah,
what's around you, right?
that's a, I mean, Flannery O'Connor is someone I was thinking about the other day because, of course, her character in Everything That Rises Must Converge um, is obsessed with shoes. And that also, remember, a good man is hard to find,
Mhm.
like the older lady and the whole all the class stuff going on there. I was thinking the other day about Larry Brown and how much I missed him and his work. um, I loved his novel Joe. I loved his short story Samaritans. And he was from Tunica, Mississippi, and he was a sharecropper's son, and he lived in Tunica, Mississippi his whole life. And nobody wrote like Larry Brown. And one of my other favorite writers that I was reading last week was Kent Harif. Do you
Oh,
remember Kent
yeah.
Harif?
Yeah.
He died. He was so young too. He was only 71, but he was writing about, the plains, the high plains of Colorado, which is where my real father was from.
Hmm.
No one writes about that that kind of plains, winter raising cattle like Kent Harif. So I agree. I agree with that. Like, people, I have this face, so people tell me their life story all the time. Like my girls always joke, Mom hears like 4 life stories every week. It's true. I can be at the grocery store and someone will tell me their life story. It's just my face. But my of my children, who has that? My middle kid, Delphine. It
Hmm.
happens to her. She lives in New York right now. She works at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. She's a fellow there.
Mhm.
It happens to her all the time. She'll go to the bodega because, like, she's obsessed with, like, we have like the liquor store, but like the bodega is different. Somebody will come up to her and tell her their life story, and she'll call me and be like, Mom, how did you give this to me? And I say, I don't know. It doesn't happen to the oldest one. It doesn't
Got
happen to
it.
the youngest one, but it happens to Delphine.
Hmm.
And it's a great thing to have, but you're also carrying all these stories.
Hmm.
And some of them are very grief filled. So I feel like I have too many things to write about. And when people, especially during COVID, where people are like, I haven't left my house for 2 years. And, for my neighborhood, everybody's had COVID at
Hmm.
least once. I have my neighbor across the street, Jim Calderon, died of COVID.
Hmm.
I just made cookies for his widow. She got left with 2 high school kids. My neighbor Mario was in the first 100 people to have COVID
Hmm.
in Southern California, and he survived. So I cooked. There's 5 kids and 3 grown-ups next door, and everybody has to go to work. Mario installs air conditioners. My neighbor Johnny Orta across the street, his uncle Frank was one of the first motorcycle cops in Riverside.
Hmm.
He was really a big influence with me writing about Johnny Frias, because Frank Orta and his family used to work um, with Dwayne at Juvenile Hall. Frank Orta used to sit right out in front of my house on his motorcycle. He died of COVID last year. So,
Hmm.
like, we've lost an enormous amount of people. So when people are like, I can't write, I haven't left my house, there are no stories to tell. Kind of hard. It's hard to have the sad stories. It is,
Hmm.
but we've lost a lot of people, and that's what I'm trying to write about with, really with, especially with Lorette and Grief, the 2 characters that I'm there. They show up in the next book. Lorette works at St. Bernardine Hospital. She's
Hmm.
in the heart of it, and she fits on all my nurse friends.
Before we go, I wanted to ask you about your office. And if you're listening to the podcast, you can't see Susan's wonderful office, and you'll have to go to the YouTube channel and watch, at least take a look at this talk we're having. But you have the most colorful office. Tell me about it.
It's because my little house was it's an old farmhouse, and it was 2 bedrooms and 1 bath. I mean, that's what I wrote about. And In the Country of Women too, there was no
Mhm.
air conditioning, there was no shower, only a tub. when we bought it in 1988, and no air conditioning, no heat. And the man who had owned it was 95 when he sold it to us, and he and his wife raised 4 kids, and there was just one little bedroom in the middle and one in the back. But this room was like a parlor. So like you see the sliding doors, like this would be like your music room or your parlor. So we were always like, how is there a parlor, a living room, and a dining room, but the bedrooms are this big? But yeah, there's no closet in here. So everyone always comes in here to work, especially all my kids did their homework in here. During COVID, I had 4 people. Like I had my youngest daughter was working for Amazon at the kitchen table. So she'd be taking meetings with like Michael Connolly and Walter Mosley and Idris Elba, and we'd be trying to make oatmeal. And she'd be like, that was fun. But yeah, Delphine would work in here. Kumi, my son-in-law, works for YouTube. So he was working in the back. But what I have is this beautiful behind me. Oh, hold on one second. You know, I have to plug my computer in. This is like my former student table. I love this table. So Alex Espinosa, Stillwater Saints, Vanessa Hua, Forbidden City, Michael Jaime Becerra, Every Night is Ladies Night. And then that whole pile is like former students, Keenan Norris, Edgar Gomez. Just, I'm so like proud of them. And then on this side, Alex actually brought me, he brought me Our Lady of Guadalupe, this one up here. That's from the shrine of Our Lady of Guadalupe in Mexico City. And Alex and I, like, that's something we think about a lot. That's our totem. And yeah, there's pictures of my kids, but like, when people say I don't have time to read, whether it's my students or like fellow writers or whoever, I just always think, but that's our job. Like when people are like, see The Office and they're like, have you read all those books? I mean, you have to look at the top up there. There's Ishmael Reed, Wanda Coleman. But yeah, of course, I mean, I read all the time, just like you, Barbara. Like, and then this stack right here is just what I was talking to you about. Like, this is my original copy of Sula. This is one of my most treasured possessions because I read this when I was 11. I got this at the grocery store. You know, it was 75 cents.
Right.
Yeah.
I think I have that copy too.
It was at the grocery store in the rack.
Right.
And you know what? The funny thing is, I made this pile the other day because somebody had asked me to write an essay, and I was working on this essay. This is the same thing. This is Autobiography of Miss Jane Pittman. Look how old this is. I got these, you know, at the grocery store. And then this means a lot to me. These 2 books were given to me by Bell Hooks before she was Bell Hooks. I was 17 and I was in her class at USC, and her name was Gloria Jean Watkins. And she gave me these 2 books from her personal library in her office one day. And that meant the world to me. So I always try to find the perfect book for my students too. But yeah, like, just to have these books nearby while I'm working means a lot. And then look at this one. Oh, there's my mom being Heidi, right? Except for nobody came to rescue her. So yeah, thanks for asking, because I love the fact that people do always laugh and they're like, you couldn't possibly have read all these books. And I'm like, I don't do anything else. I do, like, I read all the time. It's my joy in the world still to find a new book. And to reread some of the old ones. So like I said, rereading Michael Connolly's Black Echo. And then I read The Dark Hours, you know, his new one with the Renee Ballard. Yeah. Really enjoy this new series very much. And then I think the other thing I read last week, I read Manuel Munoz has a brand new book coming out called The Consequences. So I read that in manuscript form. I read somebody that you should have on your show, Toni Ann Johnson. Her book is coming out in a couple months. I read that in manuscript. It's the Flannery O'Connor Prize winner, chosen by Roxane Gay. See, I'm always going to plug somebody else. But that book is really good. It's called Light Skin Gone to Waste. My girls know, like, they're like, Mom's going to read now. And I think what I love is that even though Rosette, works in the film industry, my 26-year-old, she read all the Tessa Dare, she read all the Bridgerton books, the Julia Quinn books. She
Mhm.
told us about Bridgerton 2 years before it happened, and she'd already read all the books. So I love that about all three of my girls love to read. It makes me very happy.
Well, and like you said, if you're a writer, that's part of the job.
And it should be the most joyous part of your job. I always tease my students, if you don't have time to read, I just want you to think about Kobe and LeBron. Like Kobe and LeBron, they play the whole basketball game. They get themselves back in shape and they go home and they watch game film.
Mhm.
And they want to watch how somebody else is shooting that three,
Right.
right? And then they watch other people's and shooting the three, then they shoot the three. I'm like, all people who love what they do it all the time. And
All the
whether you're an athlete or a writer, if you're a singer, of course you're listening to other
Mhm.
people's music. So I don't think writing should be the thing where people go, I don't have time to read. I'm like,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Well, before we go, I always like to end with advice, or maybe advice you were given that has always stayed with you, or what you do when you hit a wall and you don't know what to write next. What do you do?
I think like many writers, I mean, my kids are here, they come and go, they're grown. My porch is a place of great solace for me, but like even today, like my mom will sit on the porch and she'll tell me something because she has dementia. She'll tell me something that she's never told me before, and it's always fascinating. And then I'm going to take her back. She lives in assisted living right now, and then Dwayne will come over, and he told me last week something about my dad that my dad told him about having $10,000 in cash hidden in a closet. I'm like, I never knew that money was there, and he said, I know. He told me because in case anything happened, he wanted me to know. I'm like, I'm sorry, what's happening? The first thing I can say is listen. I'm a very good listener. I think a lot of times writing is about being able to listen and hearing something and being able to recreate dialogue because you're a good listener. But when I'm stuck, I will say that my favorite thing in the world um, is to watch narrative television as well. Like I do love to read, but I don't like unscripted, which is funny because Rosette teases me about it. But to watch a really good like narrative television show, um, I really like the British mysteries because I like the way the plot moves. So I will watch some TV and I'll watch a great, series like Stranger Things. When we were sick 2 weeks ago, Delphine and I were sick together, and her husband, and they got better because I took care of them and got it. We watched the Marvel three series from the Marvel universe, which is what I do when I'm with Delphine.
Mm.
I watched Moon Knight with her, and of course, Moon Knight was about a family and a secret. And I love that, like with each of my girls, there's a series that they want me to watch or show. Rosette, we always watch Formula One racing. She likes unscripted, and those are great shows. So yeah, sometimes I enjoy like watching TV with my daughters and talking about how narrative works, and that frees up my brain for when I'm going back to my own work.
Mm. Well, as always, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
You're such a good reader, and it's always fun to talk to you. And I'm glad we got to talk about the noir thing because we both have quite the fondness for that. So,
Very fun.
yeah.
Very
I'm looking forward to getting Accra Noir, that Mary Nana Amadankwas. That's
Mhm.
what I'm ordering for myself this weekend too.
It's coming out, huh?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, super fun.